most important elements of understanding how the Australian privacy law works requires you to look at the APPs. One of the things that we saw in previous assignments is that students were able to identify that there were risks of breaches of the privacy law, but they weren't able to link them to APP. So I wanted to make a specific video to make sure that we're all on the same page with this. So, as I mentioned, there are, drumroll please, we have 13 APPs in all. Oh, and only 12 of them are on the screen. So I'll need to do something about that. But let's go through the first 12. So APP 1. So effectively, that requires open and transparent management of personal information. So what I want to do is try and give you an example for each one of how that might be complied with. So blockchain, its very nature is transparent information, right? So a blockchain company might comply with APP1 by having a comprehensive privacy policy on its website. And that policy would clearly outline how it collects, uses, and discloses personal information. It would be easily accessible, easy to find, and it would be written in plain English. I didn't even need to say blockchain company there, did I? Because essentially that's the compliance approach for pretty much every company. So APP2 deals with anonymity and synonymity. So a way that a company might comply with this. So say we've got an AI company that provides some sort of chatbot to answer questions and provide help. If it allows users to interact with the bot without providing their real name, gives them the option to use a pseudonym or to remain completely anonymous, it's going to be complying with APP2. If it doesn't, if it requires a whole lot of personal information, your full name and your email address and date of birth before it will answer a query about your electricity bill, then chances are it is not complying with that APP2. And why I say chances are, it would need a reason. It needs to be transparent in the reason for collecting and using and disclosing that personal information, which goes back to APP1. So APP3, that deals with the collection of solicited personal information. So how do we comply with that? Say we've got a big data analytics firm that collects personal data from clients, but it only uses it only collects the data that it needs for its analytics services. Say, for example, RMIT. And by the way, I'm making this up. I don't know whether RMIT does this or not. RMIT wants to get some better analytics around which students are doing well and which students are struggling with online learning. So as you can imagine, we collect a lot of data in the back end of Canvas, and it might decide to provide some of that to a data analytics team or to an external firm to get some analytics so that we could identify patterns or triggers when students need more assistance. Sounds great, right? Well, number one, to comply with APP1, if RMIT does in fact collect the kind of data I'm thinking about, APP1 would require it to include in its privacy policy information about the ways in which it might disclose that data to third parties, to the students or the persons whose data it collects. Secondly, in order to comply with APP3, which is the one we're most interested in here now, it would need to make sure that only the data that the data analytics firm needs is actually made available to it. So if the purpose of the data analytics exercise was to identify the kinds of patterns or triggers where a student might need future help, or to train an AI to identify these things, actually the personally identifying information, student number, your date of birth, or your name or your address, probably wouldn't be necessary. I say probably because date of birth actually or at least the year of birth might be relevant, because the data might actually cut and slice between, say, mature age students and younger students. And so it might be looking, because the triggers for a mature age student struggling compared to a younger student might be different. I don't know. I'm making this up on the spot, as I said. But for compliance with APP3, it's going to be necessary that only the data that is relevant to the analytics service is actually collected. And if we're looking at sensitive information, so for example, say we are collecting data for the purpose of you training an AI to predict the occurrence or the likelihood of certain diseases, it's going to require explicit consent from the people that it's collecting that data from. APP4. Oh, let's highlight it so we know we're talking about it. APP4 is about dealing with unsolicited personal information. So let's use an example here. Say a blockchain company receives some personal information that it didn't ask for. It reviews the information and determines that it's not necessary for its functions. To comply with APP4, the company would need to securely destroy the information. In other words, we collect data we don't need or that we don't have consent for, unsolicited data in some way, then we need to get rid of it to comply with APP4. APP5 is about the notification of collection of personal information. So if a company clearly informs users at the time that they sign up about the types of personal information it's going to collect or how it will be used, then it's going to comply with APP5. APP6 is about or requires disclosure of the use or the disclosure of personal information. So if a company uses personal information for the purpose of improving its services, then it's not, it can't use, if it collects for that purpose and it has consent to collect for that purpose, it can't use that information for any other purpose unless it obtains consent for individuals. So let me give you a hypothetical example here. Voice data has been used by the ATO, I know, for a very long time now. Well, when I say very long time, probably 5 to 8 years, as part of its process for identifying people who are interacting with it. So when I talk to the ATO, I have to provide a whole lot of personal information, like my birth date, etc. But they also use my voice print to make sure that it's me and not somebody else pretending to be me who has that data. Great. More recently, we've found that AI has been able to use voice print data or information about a person's voice to predict the likelihood of certain cancer diagnoses just from the voice print. Absolutely fascinating. It's one of the black box issues. We don't know how it is. So let's say I gave consent, and I did many years ago, to the ATO collecting my voice print data as part of the process of identifying me. Let's say it wants to, out of the goodness of its heart, hand over that voice print data to a AI company that's looking to improve its diagnostic capabilities. APP6 says it can't do that without getting my consent, because the use that I consented to was actually being able to identify me. For training it on other data, I haven't consented to that use. APP7 deals with direct marketing. So again, we see this all the time. Companies comply with this by getting explicit consent from users before sending emails about other products and services. Some of them, they really annoy me, I have to say, won't actually give you the thing that you've signed up for until you agree to sign up for everything else. Unsubscribe, my favorite button on an email ever. APP8, this one deals with cross-border disclosure of personal information. So this is when Australian companies are collecting information that might actually go offshore or where they take information or process information that has been received from offshore. So going back to our earlier week, our first week, I think, when we talked about jurisdiction, this is where this comes in. So before a company discloses personal information to an overseas partner, it needs to ensure that the partner is subject to rules that are at least as good as the APPs. So for this reason, many companies will in fact look to the GDPR because that is the highest standard globally. And so if a company complies and meets GDPR standards, then it's going to meet the APP standards. APP 9 is about the adoption, use, or disclosure of government-related identifiers. So things like your tax file number, for example, or your passport number. The only way that a company can use that kind of data, so driver's license, passport, tax file number, etc., it can only use these identifiers for verification purposes when they are required by law. So as a general rule, when your employer, who is required to collect your tax file number, if they don't have your tax file number, then they have to withhold the maximum amount of tax and send it off. The only way that they can actually withhold tax at the lower rate is if they have the ATO, then they're required by law to collect it, so that is acceptable. But if at a bank, for example, needs to collect your ATO, your tax file number for exactly the same reason, so that it can withhold, doesn't have to withhold interest, tax from interest from you, those kinds of things. You can do that if it's required by law. But if me running my own little shop here and say I sell car tires, if I want to get your tax file number every time I deal with you, no. One of the reasons why we have ABNs for businesses, Australian business numbers, they're not our tax file number. That's another level of identification, but it's a public-facing number that identifies our tax status as a GST registered entity. So the next one is APP 10, which is about the quality of personal information that is collected and stored. And so companies, to comply with this, or not just companies actually, anybody who's required to comply with the privacy law needs to regularly update its databases and verify the accuracy of the personal information that it holds. And this connects with a right to check that the information that a company holds about you is correct and to verify or update it from time to time. APP 11 is about the security of that personal information. So essentially, this is the requirement that companies that hold personal information and sensitive information, or including sensitive information, have and implement robust security measures. This will include encryption, secure services, that they know where their servers are located, and that they take reasonable and strong steps to protect the personal information that it holds from unauthorized access and from data breaches. APP 12 is about the right to access personal information, and I mentioned this when I was talking about APP 10 a minute ago. In order to comply with this requirement, companies need to have systems in place that allow users to access and review the personal information that they hold about them. So the individuals can identify or request information about what a company holds about them or a government department holds about them at any time. Now, the last one, not on the slide, I'll try and put an animation on the video, is APP 13. And this is about the rights of people whose data is with Privacy Act compliant entities, so government departments and companies with turnovers of more than $3 million, or entities that use sensitive information, so like health industry, for example. They need to have a clear process in place for individuals to request corrections to that personal information. So APPs 10, 11, 12 and 13 are all related in this way. APP 13 also requires these entities to act promptly to update records when a request is made. Great. So that's all I wanted to say here. In the next very short video, I'll do a quick comparison of the APPs and the GDPR or the US privacy. This is really just an accompaniment to some of the material that's on Canvas. Questions, concerns, frustrations, compliments, suggestions, I take them all.